Sarah Martinez had been working at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility for 3 years, but she had never ventured near the sniper range during active training hours. Her job was simple enough: maintenance and cleaning of the facilities after the elite Navy SEALs completed their grueling exercises. She preferred the quiet hours when the base was nearly empty, when she could work in peace without the constant crack of gunfire and shouted commands that filled the air during training sessions. The morning started like any other Tuesday in October. Sarah arrived at 0500 hours, just as the last of the night shift security was completing their rounds. The base was still dark except for the harsh fluorescent lights that illuminated the main walkways. She pulled her maintenance cart from the storage shed, loaded with industrial cleaning supplies, fresh towels, and equipment for deep cleaning the various training facilities. Her supervisor, Master Chief Rodriguez, had given her a new assignment that week. The long-range precision shooting facility needed a thorough cleaning after an intensive 2-week training cycle. The Navy SEALs had been pushing through advanced sniper training, and the facility had seen constant use. Spent brass casings, equipment residue, and the general wear of intensive military training had left the range in need of serious attention. Sarah had cleaned shooting ranges before, but never one used by such elite forces. The SEAL training facility was different from regular military installations. Everything was more intense, more precise, more demanding. Even the cleaning standards were higher. Every surface had to be spotless. Every piece of equipment had to function perfectly, because lives depended on the training that took place there. As she approached the sniper range complex, Sarah noticed something unusual. Typically, the facility would be completely empty at this hour, with all equipment secured and training areas vacant. But today, she could see lights still on in the main training building. She checked her watch, 0530 hours. No training was scheduled to begin until 0800. She hesitated at the entrance, wondering if she should return later. Master Chief Rodriguez had been clear about the timeline. The range needed to be cleaned and ready for the next training cycle that would begin the following Monday. That gave her exactly 5 days to complete what was typically a week-long job. She couldn't afford to lose time waiting for the area to clear. Sarah decided to start with the exterior areas and work her way toward the main facility. The outdoor sections of the range stretched for over 1,000 yards, with various target positions, observation posts, and equipment stations scattered throughout. The morning air was crisp, and she could see her breath as she began collecting the debris left from the previous training session. The work was methodical and familiar. She had developed her own system over the years, start from the furthest point and work back toward the main facility, ensuring nothing was missed. The SEAL trainees were meticulous, but intensive training always left traces. Spent ammunition casings glinted in the grass, equipment ties, and packaging materials were scattered around various positions, and the observation bunkers needed thorough cleaning. As Sarah worked her way closer to the main facility, she began to hear voices. Not the usual sharp commands and responses of training, but quieter conversation. Someone was definitely still in the building. She glanced at her work schedule again, confirming that no training was supposed to be active. The voices grew clearer as she approached the main structure. Through the reinforced windows, she could see movement inside. It looked like several people in military fatigues, but something seemed off about their posture and movements. They weren't moving with the usual crisp efficiency she associated with SEAL training. Sarah continued her cleaning routine, working on the exterior equipment storage areas. These contained the specialized gear used for long-range precision shooting, spotting scopes, range-finding equipment, weather monitoring devices, and various support tools. Everything had to be cleaned and properly maintained according to strict military specifications. The sun was beginning to rise as she worked, casting long shadows across the range. The facility was built into a natural valley, providing protection from wind and optimal conditions for precision shooting training. Sarah had always found it peaceful, despite knowing the deadly serious nature of the training that took place there. Around 0700 hours, as Sarah was cleaning the equipment storage area closest to the main building, she heard the facility door open. She looked up to see a figure in military fatigues stepping outside. Even from a distance, she could tell something was wrong. The person's movements were slow and uncertain, completely unlike the confident bearing of the SEAL she had seen during her years at the facility. The figure spotted her and began walking in her direction. As he got closer, Sarah could see that he was young, probably in his early 20s, with the lean build typical of Special Operations Forces. But his face was pale, and there was something in his expression that made her instinctively step back. "Ma'am," he called out as he approached, his voice carrying a slight tremor that didn't match his military bearing. "I need to ask you something." Sarah stopped her work and faced him fully. Up close, she could see that his uniform was disheveled, and there were dark stains on his fatigues that made her stomach tighten with concern. His eyes had a hollow, distant look that she had never seen before but somehow recognized as deeply troubling. "Are you okay?" she asked, setting down her cleaning supplies and taking a step toward him. "Do you need medical attention?" The young SEAL, she could see his insignia now, shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am. Not the kind you're thinking of." He paused, looking back toward the facility building, then returned his gaze to her. "My name is Petty Officer First Class Jake Mitchell. I need to ask you, have you ever had to make a choice that you knew would change everything?" The question caught Sarah completely off guard. She had been expecting a routine interaction, maybe a request to avoid certain areas while training continued, or a question about the cleaning schedule. Instead, she was facing a clearly distressed young man asking philosophical questions at dawn on a military shooting range. "I'm not sure I understand," Sarah replied carefully. "Is there something specific you need help with?" Jake Mitchell looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing something important. "Inside that building," he said finally, "there are 3 other members of my unit. We've been here all night, working through something that happened during our last deployment. Something that's not in any official report." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. She had worked around military personnel long enough to recognize when someone was carrying a heavy burden. The young SEAL's demeanor suggested he was dealing with something far beyond normal training stress. "Should I contact someone?" she asked. "Your commanding officer or medical personnel?" "No," Jake said quickly, then softened his tone. "Not yet. We need to work through this ourselves first. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Sarah nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading but sensing its importance. "If you knew that doing the right thing would destroy everything you'd worked for, everything you believed about yourself, and your purpose, would you still do it?" Jake's voice was steady now, but Sarah could see the weight of whatever he was carrying in his eyes. The question hung in the morning air between them. Sarah had spent most of her adult life in routine work, following established procedures, avoiding the kinds of dramatic decisions that Jake seemed to be wrestling with. But looking at this young man, she recognized something fundamental about moral choice that transcended their different circumstances. "I think," she said slowly, "that if you have to ask the question, you already know the answer. The right thing is usually the hardest thing." Jake nodded, a slight smile crossing his face for the first time since he had approached her. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." He looked back toward the facility again, then returned his attention to Sarah. "We have a situation in there that requires some very careful thinking, and maybe some help from someone who isn't part of our world." Sarah felt the weight of the moment settling around her. Whatever was happening in that building was clearly significant, and this young SEAL was reaching out to her for reasons she didn't fully understand. Her normal routine, her comfortable distance from the intense world of special operations training, was about to change dramatically. "What kind of help?" she asked. Jake was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "The kind that requires trust. Complete trust. And the kind that might put you in a position where you have to make some of those hard choices we were just talking about." The morning sun was fully up now, casting the shooting range in clear, bright light. Sarah looked around at the familiar equipment, the carefully maintained facilities, the orderly world she had inhabited for 3 years. She sensed that whatever Jake Mitchell was about to ask her would take her far from that comfortable routine. But looking into his eyes, seeing the genuine distress and moral struggle he was carrying, she realized that some moments demand more from us than we expect to give. Some situations require us to step beyond our normal boundaries and engage with challenges we never anticipated facing. "Tell me what you need," she said. Jake Mitchell's expression showed both relief and apprehension. "Inside that building, we have evidence of something that happened during our last deployment in Afghanistan. Something that doesn't match the official reports that have already been filed. Something that could destroy careers, in military prosecutions, and change how people view what happened during a critical mission." Sarah listened, understanding that she was being drawn into something far more complex and consequential than her usual work routine. The problem is, Jake continued, we're all part of the unit involved. Anything we say or do will be seen as self-serving or as an attempt to cover up our own actions. We need someone from outside, someone who can look at the evidence objectively and help us figure out the right way to handle it. The weight of what he was asking began to settle on Sarah. She was being invited into a situation involving military operations, official reports, and decisions that could affect multiple careers and possibly national security issues. This was far beyond anything she had ever dealt with. But, looking at Jake Mitchell, seeing the genuine moral struggle in his expression, she recognized something important. Sometimes the most significant moments in our lives come disguised as ordinary days that suddenly demand extraordinary responses. Show me, she said. Jake nodded and began walking back toward the facility building. Sarah left her cleaning cart where it was and followed him, knowing that her routine morning had just become something entirely different. As they approached the building, she could see other figures moving inside, and she realized that she was about to enter a world where the stakes were higher than anything she had previously encountered. The door to the facility opened as they approached, and Sarah saw two other young men in military fatigues. Their expressions showed the same tension and moral weight that she had seen in Jake's face. Behind them, she could see equipment and documents spread across tables, suggesting an intensive review of some kind of evidence. "This is Sarah Martinez," Jake announced to the others. "She's going to help us figure out what to do." As Sarah crossed the threshold into the facility, she understood that her life had just taken an unexpected turn. Whatever she was about to see and learn would change not only her understanding of what happened during a military deployment, but also her role in determining how truth and justice would be served in a situation where the stakes could hardly be higher. The interior of the sniper training facility was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Maps covered every available wall surface, marked with coordinates, flight paths, and tactical annotations in military shorthand. Several laptops displayed satellite imagery and what appeared to be mission footage. Documents were spread across multiple tables in carefully organized stacks, each marked with classification levels that Sarah recognized but had never seen in person. The three other SEALs in the room looked up as Jake brought her inside. Their faces showed exhaustion, stress, and something else that Sarah was beginning to recognize as moral anguish. These were elite warriors dealing with something that went far beyond normal combat stress. "Guys, this is Sarah Martinez," Jake announced. "She works maintenance here, but more importantly, she's willing to help us work through our situation." The tallest of the three, a man with sergeant's stripes who appeared to be in his late 20s, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant First Class David Chun. Before we go any further, I need to make sure you understand what you're getting into. What we're about to show you is classified material related to a recent deployment. Just seeing it makes you part of this situation." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she understood the full implications. Jake explained that you have evidence about something that doesn't match official reports. "That's correct," said another SEAL, introducing himself as Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Williams. "But it's more complicated than just conflicting reports. We have evidence that suggests official reports were deliberately falsified to cover up what really happened during a mission in Afghanistan 3 weeks ago." The fourth member of the group, who looked younger than the others, remained silent near one of the equipment tables. Jake noticed Sarah's glance toward him and provided an introduction. "That's Petty Officer Third Class Tommy Rodriguez. He was our spotter during the mission in question. What happened has hit him pretty hard." Sarah looked around the room again, taking in the scope of materials spread before them. "What exactly happened during this mission?" David Chin gestured toward the central table where several photographs and documents were arranged. 3 weeks ago, our unit was deployed to provide overwatch and precision fire support for an Army Rangers operation in the Kandahar region. Intelligence indicated that a high-value target was meeting with local Taliban commanders in a compound approximately 800 meters from our position. Sarah moved closer to the table, where she could see aerial photographs of a rural compound surrounded by smaller buildings. The images were marked with various tactical notations and timestamps. The mission briefing was straightforward. Marcus Williams continued. "Establish overwatch position, provide reconnaissance on target compound, and deliver precision fire if necessary to support the Rangers' assault. Standard operating procedure for this type of operation. Jake picked up the narrative. Everything went according to plan initially. We established our position before dawn, confirmed target location, and maintained surveillance while the Rangers moved into position. The compound showed normal activity, several adult males, consistent with intelligence reports about the meeting. Sarah studied the photographs, trying to understand the tactical situation being described. The compound appeared to be typical of rural Afghan construction: mud brick walls, flat roofs, and several smaller outbuildings. The problem started when the Rangers began their assault, David Chin said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Intel had indicated that the compound contained only military-age males and known combatants. But when the shooting started, we could see through our scopes that there were others in the compound. Tommy Rodriguez spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. Children. There were children in the compound. Kids running around during the firefight. Sarah felt a chill as the implications became clear. What happened to them? The room fell silent for a moment before Jake continued. That's where things get complicated. From our overwatch position, we could see everything clearly. The Rangers were taking heavy fire from the main building, but there were also civilians, including children, caught in the crossfire. Marcus Williams moved to another set of photographs. Standard rules of engagement were clear. We could engage confirmed combatants who were firing at our forces, but we also had a responsibility to avoid civilian casualties whenever possible. I had a clear shot on 2 combatants who were firing at the Rangers from an upper window, Jake continued. But there were kids in the courtyard directly below that window. The angle meant that any missed shot or ricochet could hit them. David Chin picked up the story. Jake made the call to hold fire until the civilians could clear the area. It was the right call according to our rules of engagement and basic human decency. Sarah was beginning to understand the moral complexity of the situation. But something went wrong. 2 Rangers were killed during the delay, Tommy Rodriguez said, his voice filled with pain. While we were waiting for the civilian area to clear, the combatants had continued firing, and 2 Rangers died. The weight of the situation settled on Sarah. She could see the impossible choice these men had faced: engage enemy combatants and risk killing children, or hold fire and risk the lives of fellow American soldiers. The official report filed after the mission stated that all personnel followed proper rules of engagement and that civilian casualties were avoided through careful tactical planning, Marcus Williams said. It made it sound like a clean operation with minimal complications. Jake moved to a laptop displaying what appeared to be mission footage. But that's not what actually happened. The report doesn't mention the civilian presence in the compound, the delay in engaging targets due to civilian concerns, or the fact that American casualties resulted directly from our decision to prioritize civilian protection. Sarah studied the men's faces, seeing the weight they were carrying. So the official report makes it sound like everything went smoothly. But you're dealing with the knowledge that your adherence to rules of engagement may have cost American lives. Exactly, David Chin confirmed. And now we're facing a situation where the families of those killed Rangers are being told that their loved ones died in a clean operation, while we know that they actually died because we chose to protect Afghan civilians over providing immediate fire support. The moral complexity was staggering. Sarah could see that these men were dealing with multiple layers of conflict: their duty to fellow soldiers, their responsibility to avoid civilian casualties, the truth about what actually happened, and the gap between official reports and reality. Why wasn't the truth included in the official reports? Sarah asked. Politics, Marcus Williams said bluntly. The mission was being watched at high levels because of the high-value target. A clean success looks good in Washington. A complicated mission where American soldiers die because we're protecting enemy civilians doesn't play well with politicians or the public. Jake activated the laptop display, showing aerial footage from the mission. We have the complete mission footage from our helmet cameras and drone surveillance. Everything that happened is documented. The civilian presence, our decision-making process, the timing of everything. Sarah watched portions of the footage, seeing the intensity and complexity of the combat situation. The SEALs' communications revealed professional decision-making under extreme pressure, with clear concern for both their fellow soldiers and civilian safety. So you have evidence that contradicts the official reports, but revealing it would expose the fact that American soldiers died because you prioritized civilian protection, Sarah summarized. And it would also expose the fact that our command structure was willing to file false reports to avoid political complications, David Chen added. This goes beyond just our unit. Someone at a much higher level made the decision to misrepresent what happened. Tommy Rodriguez looked up from the materials he had been reviewing. The Rangers' families deserve to know the truth about how their husbands and fathers died. But that truth might make it look like we chose Afghan kids over American soldiers. Sarah could see the impossible position these men were in. Revealing the truth would expose official dishonesty and ensure that fallen soldiers' families knew the real circumstances of their deaths. But it would also create a political firestorm about rules of engagement and could be interpreted as suggesting that American lives were sacrificed for enemy civilians. What are your options? Sarah asked. Jake ran his hands through his hair, showing the stress he was under. We could follow military channels and report the discrepancies through our chain of command. But given that someone in our command structure was involved in creating the false reports, that might just result in the evidence disappearing and us facing disciplinary action for possession of classified materials. We could go to the media, Marcus Williams suggested. Journalists would be interested in a story about military cover-ups. But that would definitely end our careers and could compromise ongoing operations that depend on classified tactics and intelligence. David Chen shook his head. Or we could do nothing. Keep quiet, let the false reports stand, and try to live with knowing that we're part of a lie that affects how those Rangers' families understand their loss. Sarah looked around the room at these four young men, each carrying the weight of an impossible moral choice. They had performed their duties professionally and ethically during combat, but now faced consequences that seemed to punish them for their integrity. Is there another option? Sarah asked. Something between official channels and going public? The SEALs looked at each other, and Sarah could see that they had been wrestling with this question throughout their long night of discussion. That's actually why we needed to talk to someone from outside our situation, Jake explained. We're too close to it. We need perspective from someone who isn't emotionally invested in military culture and career considerations. Sarah studied the materials spread around the room, trying to think through the situation objectively. What would happen if the families of the killed Rangers learned the truth through some other means? Not through official channels or media exposure, but through personal contact. David Chen looked interested. What do you mean? I mean, what if someone contacted the families directly, privately, and shared the truth about what happened? Not as a political statement or media story, but as a personal communication from the people who were there. Marcus Williams frowned. That would still be revealing classified information to unauthorized persons. It could result in court-martial proceedings. But, Tommy Rodriguez said thoughtfully, it would ensure that the families know the truth without creating a public political issue or compromising ongoing operations. Jake nodded slowly. It would be taking responsibility for our actions and ensuring that the families understand how their loved ones died, while avoiding the broader political implications of a public revelation. Sarah could see that the idea resonated with the group, but she also understood the personal risk it would involve for them. What would be the consequences for you personally? She asked. David Chen answered honestly. If discovered, it would likely end our careers in special operations, possibly in the military entirely. But we'd be able to live with ourselves knowing that we told the truth to the people who deserve to hear it. The room fell quiet as the men considered the options Sarah had suggested. She could see them weighing personal consequences against moral obligations, career implications against ethical responsibilities. There's one more thing to consider, Sarah said quietly. If you're going to take that risk, you need to make sure the families receive accurate, complete information. Not just the basic facts, but the context that helps them understand the impossible choices you faced and the professional way you handled an impossible situation. Jake looked at her with something approaching hope in his expression. Are you suggesting that we document everything clearly, provide complete context, and approach the families as professionals taking responsibility rather than as whistleblowers trying to expose a cover-up? I think, Sarah said, that you need to decide what kind of men you want to be and what kind of military you want to serve in. And then, you need to act accordingly, regardless of the consequences. The four SEALs exchanged glances, and Sarah could see that her words had crystallized something they had been struggling to articulate throughout their long night of moral wrestling. But, as they began to discuss the practicalities of contacting the Rangers' families, none of them noticed the approaching sound of multiple vehicles outside the facility. Their intensive focus on the moral dilemma had distracted them from maintaining security awareness. The sound of car doors slamming brought them all back to immediate awareness of their surroundings. Through the facility windows, they could see several black SUVs and what appeared to be military personnel in dress uniforms approaching the building. "Someone knows we're here," David Chun said grimly. "And they're not here for a friendly conversation." Jake Mitchell moved quickly to the window, peering through the reinforced glass at the approaching vehicles. 3 SUVs, multiple personnel in dress uniforms. "This looks like command-level brass." David Chin began rapidly organizing the documents on the tables. "We need to decide right now how we're going to handle this. If they're here because someone reported our presence, we could be looking at immediate disciplinary action." Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized the gravity of the situation she had become involved in. "What does this mean for me? I'm not military personnel." Marcus Williams looked at her seriously. "It means you're now a witness to everything we've discussed. Depending on what they want, you could be questioned about classified information you've been exposed to." The sound of boots on pavement grew closer. Through the window, Sarah could see at least 6 people approaching the facility, led by a tall man with colonel's insignia. Their expressions were serious and purposeful. "Everyone stay calm," Jake said, though his own tension was evident. "We haven't done anything wrong. We have legitimate concerns about mission reporting, and we have evidence to support those concerns." Tommy Rodriguez, who had been quiet through most of their discussion, suddenly spoke up with unexpected clarity. "No matter what happens, we tell the truth. We explain exactly what we've been doing and why. No lies, no cover stories." The approaching group had reached the facility entrance. Sarah could hear voices outside, though she couldn't make out specific words. The tone was official and serious. David Chun made a quick decision. "Jake, you're the senior enlisted man who initiated this review. You speak for the group initially. Marcus and Tommy organize the evidence materials so they're clearly presented. Sarah, just be honest about how you became involved." A sharp knock sounded on the facility door. "Petty Officer Mitchell, Sergeant Chun, this is Colonel Davidson." "Open the door immediately." Jake took a deep breath and moved toward the entrance. "That's our commanding officer's supervisor. This is definitely official business." He opened the door to reveal Colonel Davidson accompanied by Master Chief Rodriguez, Sarah's supervisor, and several other military personnel she didn't recognize. Colonel Davidson stepped inside, his eyes immediately taking in the scope of materials spread throughout the room. "Gentlemen, you've been missing from your assigned duties for over 12 hours. Master Chief Rodriguez reported that cleaning personnel discovered your presence here during routine facility maintenance." Sarah realized that her supervisor must have become concerned when she didn't check in at her normal time. The routine she had followed for years had been disrupted by her decision to help the SEALs, and that disruption had triggered official attention. "Sir," Jake responded formally, "we've been conducting a voluntary review of mission materials from our recent deployment. We identified discrepancies between our observations and official mission reports that we believe require attention." Colonel Davidson's expression remained neutral, but Sarah could see his eyes cataloging every document and piece of equipment visible in the room. "And you felt it necessary to conduct this review in an unauthorized location, using classified materials, without informing your chain of command." David Chin stepped forward. "Sir, the nature of the discrepancies suggested that normal reporting channels might not be appropriate. We wanted to ensure we had complete documentation before raising concerns that could affect ongoing operations or personnel evaluations." One of the other officers, wearing Major's insignia, moved toward the tables containing mission footage and photographs. These materials should have remained in secure storage. Removing them to this location without authorization constitutes a serious breach of security protocols. Sarah watched the interaction, beginning to understand that the SEALs' attempt to address their moral concerns was being treated as a disciplinary matter rather than a legitimate review of mission conduct. "Colonel Davidson," Jake said carefully, "we have documented evidence that official mission reports contain inaccurate information about civilian presence rules of engagement decisions, and the circumstances surrounding American casualties. We believe this information is relevant to how families understand their losses and how similar situations might be handled in the future. The room fell silent as Colonel Davidson studied Jake's face. Sarah could see the colonel weighing multiple considerations: the seriousness of the security breach, the implications of the claims being made, and the potential consequences of the situation for military operations and morale. Major Peterson, Colonel Davidson addressed the other officer. Please secure all materials in this room for proper review. Nothing leaves this facility until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. Sarah felt a moment of panic as she realized she was witnessing what might be the suppression of evidence the SEALs had risked their careers to preserve. But before she could say anything, Tommy Rodriguez stepped forward. Sir, before you make any decisions about these materials, I think you should see the mission footage. All of it, from beginning to end. Colonel Davidson looked at the young SEAL for a long moment. Petty Officer Rodriguez, you're not in a position to make recommendations about what I should or shouldn't review. With respect, sir, Tommy continued, you're about to make decisions that will affect how 4 American families understand how their husbands and fathers died. I think those families deserve to have those decisions made by someone who has seen everything that happened. The directness of Tommy's statement created an uncomfortable tension in the room. Sarah could see that he was risking severe disciplinary action by challenging a senior officer's authority, but his moral conviction was overriding military protocol. Marcus Williams stepped beside Tommy. Sir, we're not questioning the mission or the decisions made during combat. We're questioning why the reports filed afterward don't accurately reflect what happened. Master Chief Rodriguez, who had been silent since entering the facility, finally spoke. Colonel, these men have exemplary service records. If they believe there are discrepancies significant enough to risk their careers over, maybe we should understand what they've found before we decide how to handle the situation. Colonel Davidson looked around the room at the assembled personnel, the extensive materials spread across multiple tables, and the obvious emotional weight being carried by the 4 SEALs. Sarah could see him recognizing that this was not a simple disciplinary matter. Major Peterson set up the equipment to review the mission footage. I want to see everything these men have been working with. He turned to the SEALs. You have one opportunity to present your findings completely and professionally. After that, I'll decide how this situation will be resolved. Jake moved to the laptop containing the mission footage while the other SEALs organized supporting documents and photographs. Sarah remained near the wall, uncertain of her role but understanding that she was witnessing something significant. Sir, Jake began, this footage shows our unit's overwatch position during the operation to capture a high-value target in Kandahar province 3 weeks ago. The mission briefing indicated that the target compound contained only military-age males and known combatants. The laptop screen displayed aerial footage of the compound from the beginning of the operation. Colonel Davidson and the other officers moved closer to observe the display clearly. Initially, surveillance confirmed the intelligence reports. Multiple adult males, consistent with the expected meeting of Taliban commanders. Jake narrated as the footage played. Our unit established overwatch position and maintained reconnaissance while Rangers moved into assault position. The footage continued, showing the approach of the assault team and the beginning of combat operations. Sarah could see the professionalism and coordination of the military operation, but also the intensity and complexity of the combat environment. Here's where the situation changed, Jake continued, pausing the footage at a critical moment. As the Rangers began their assault, civilian presence became evident in the compound, including children. The paused frame clearly showed small figures moving through the compound courtyard, obviously children caught in an active combat zone. Sarah could see Colonel Davidson's expression change as he absorbed the implications. At this point, David Chun continued the narrative. We had clear shots on combatants firing at the Rangers, but civilian presence in the potential impact area required us to hold fire until the civilians could clear. Tommy Rodriguez's voice was steady now as he provided technical details. Standard rules of engagement required us to avoid civilian casualties when tactically possible. The angle and range meant that any missed shots or ricochets could impact the children in the courtyard. The footage continued, showing the tactical delay as the SEALs waited for civilian safety while Rangers continued taking fire from enemy positions. Sarah could see the impossible position the Overwatch team had been placed in. During this delay, 2 Rangers were killed by enemy fire, Marcus Williams stated quietly. Rangers who might have survived if we had engaged the enemy positions immediately, without consideration for civilian safety. Colonel Davidson stopped the footage and looked at each of the 4 SEALs. So your unit followed proper rules of engagement, prioritized civilian protection, and American soldiers died as a result? Yes, sir, Jake confirmed. We made the tactically correct decision according to our training and rules of engagement. But American families lost husbands and fathers because we chose to protect Afghan children. Major Peterson reviewed the supporting documents while the footage continued. What do the official mission reports say about these circumstances? David Chun handed him a folder. The official reports describe the mission as a clean operation with minimal complications. No mention of civilian presence, no mention of rules of engagement considerations, no explanation of why American casualties occurred. Sarah watched Colonel Davidson's face as he absorbed the full scope of the situation. The SEALs hadn't just discovered minor discrepancies in paperwork. They had evidence that official reports completely misrepresented the circumstances surrounding American deaths in combat. Who filed these reports? Colonel Davidson asked. The question hung in the air uncomfortably. Sarah could see the SEALs exchange glances, understanding that their answer would implicate members of their command structure in deliberate misrepresentation. Sir, Jake said carefully, the reports were filed through normal channels. We don't know who made the decision to omit the civilian considerations, but someone at the command level chose to characterize this as a routine operation rather than document the complex moral choices involved. Colonel Davidson studied the materials for several more minutes while the room remained silent. Sarah could see him weighing the implications, not just for the 4 SEALs who had raised the concerns, but for military reporting procedures, family notifications, and the broader question of how combat operations were characterized for political and public consumption. Finally, he looked up at the group. Gentlemen, you've identified a serious discrepancy between operational reality and official documentation. The question now is how to address it in a way that serves truth, honors the sacrifice of fallen soldiers, and maintains operational security. Major Peterson looked concerned. Sir, correcting these reports would require acknowledging that previous documentation was inaccurate. That could have significant implications for ongoing operations and public confidence in military reporting. It could also, Tommy Rodriguez said quietly, help families understand that their loved ones died because American soldiers chose to protect children, even enemy children. That might be something they would want to know. Sarah felt compelled to speak, despite her uncertainty about her role in the situation. Colonel Davidson, these men have spent all night wrestling with an impossible moral choice because they care about doing the right thing. Maybe the question isn't how to manage the political implications, but how to honor both the soldiers who died and the soldiers who made the hard choice that led to those deaths. Colonel Davidson looked at her, and Sarah realized she had just inserted herself directly into a military command decision as a civilian maintenance worker. But something in his expression suggested he was considering her words seriously. Ms. Martinez, you've been exposed to classified information and are now part of this situation whether you intended to be or not. What you've seen here today affects how you understand military operations and the men who carry them out. What do you think should happen? Sarah looked around the room at the 4 young SEALs who had risked everything to address their moral concerns, at the senior officers weighing complex institutional implications, and at the evidence of an impossible combat decision that had cost American lives. I think, she said slowly, that the families of those dead soldiers deserve to know that they died because fellow Americans chose to protect children. I think that's something to be proud of, not something to hide. Colonel Davidson nodded thoughtfully. Major Peterson, prepare a recommendation for amended mission reports that accurately reflect the circumstances of this operation. Include documentation of rules of engagement compliance and the tactical decision-making process that led to American casualties. He turned to the 4 SEALs. Gentlemen, you will be commended for identifying critical discrepancies in official documentation. Your actions tonight demonstrate the kind of moral courage that the military should exemplify. Finally, he addressed Sarah directly. Ms. Martinez, you will be asked to sign confidentiality agreements regarding the classified information you've been exposed to. But I want you to know that your perspective as a civilian has helped military personnel remember why we serve. As the group began the process of properly documenting and reporting the true circumstances of the mission, Sarah realized that her routine morning of cleaning a shooting range had led to something far more significant than she could have imagined. She had helped 4 young warriors find the courage to tell the truth, even when that truth was complicated and painful. The morning sun was now fully up, casting bright light through the facility windows onto the materials that documented both the courage of soldiers who died protecting their comrades and the integrity of soldiers who chose to protect children even at the cost of American lives. It was, Sarah realized, a story worth telling truthfully, regardless of the complications that truth might bring.